What's up, everybody? This is Andy, and welcome to the first part of the Ultimate Excursion Comparison. I'm making these videos because I've noticed that there's been a lot of questions about which Ford Excursion would suit people for their various needs. Now, Ford Excursion has been called the king of SUVs, and I completely agree with it being called that because it really is. These things were purpose-built, they're awesome, and they're just the ultimate SUV you could have. Now, as you can see here, I have a couple of them. Actually, I have four. And these happen to be the three that we're going to be comparing. There were multiple different engine and transmission combinations that the Excursions came with, as well as appearance differences, interior differences, and I'm going to do my best to explain all of the differences to you guys. Now, this one is a 2000 with the V10. This is a 2005 with the 6-liter diesel, and this is a 2002 with the 7.3-liter diesel. Now, they made four different power plants for the Excursion. They made the 7.3, the 6-liter, the V10, and the 5.4. Now, I don't have a 5.4. Now, I live out here in southwestern Colorado, and because we live at altitude and it's quite snowy out here, and people tend to use their vehicles for work out here more than pleasure, as you would see in a nicer climate, you don't really see too many of the 5.4s out here because they just, and I'm going to catch heat for this, but they just, in my opinion, don't have enough power to really do a whole lot more than pulling a light trailer or just, hauling people or, light stuff around. So I don't own a 5.4. I love the 5.4 engine. I had an Expedition with one. I had an F-150 with one. It's a great combination, but I don't have one today. So first part we're going to be doing is focusing on the engine differences between the V10, the 7.3, and the 6-liter diesel. We're going to go ahead and start with the V10. Okay, well, here it is now. Keep in mind, I just picked this thing up and this engine is extremely dirty. It's actually quite embarrassing that I'm even filming it in this condition, but it is what it is, real life condition. So this is the 6.8-liter Ford V10, and these are actually really, really good engines. Now, it's quite unique to see a V10, outside of a race car or something high performance. Dodge did a V10 also, but Ford has them a lot more, and they're a lot more popular. They use them in the motorhome chassis. They use them in the Super Duties as well. And as of 2021, I'm pretty sure they're still producing them for like U-Haul trucks and motorhomes and stuff. But anyway, it's a pretty simple engine. It's naturally aspirated, so there's no turbo or supercharger, and basic components you'd find on any standard gas engine. This one actually, when you get the V10, you have a vacuum brake booster. This doesn't use Hydro Boost. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. These have a single battery, which you see right there. Vacuum reservoir, which is real similar to the 6.0 and 7.3 Excursions, but everything else is pretty straightforward. This is a coil on plug design, so you have one coil per spark plug. Now, that being said, V10s are great engines, but they aren't without their issues. Now, some people experience an issue where the spark plug will actually blow up out of the spark plug well, and you'll get a misfire, so you end up having to rethread the hole and put an insert in it. But I mean, other than that, the V10s really didn't have that many issues. They were strong engines. They're great for pulling, and they do most of their work really, really well in the higher RPM ranges, so anything above like 2,700. These things, when you're climbing a hill, pulling a trailer, they love to sing. You just let them sing all day, and the only thing they won't pass is a gas station. Now, a lot of people experience results with the V10s getting similar mile per gallon figures, towing or not towing. I mean, I've heard of all the way down to 6, and I've heard of people getting all the way up to 14 if you're just being really nice to it, and it happens to be a 2-wheel drive one, as 4-wheel drive adds more weight. But it's a pretty nicely designed engine compartment. I mean, you can get down on the driver's side if you need to do anything with the exhaust manifold studs, because those are known to break. This is a little tighter over here, but other than that, it's a pretty straightforward engine. I mean, I got my little cheat sheet here. So the V10s were available from 2000 to 2005 on the Excursions. Now the Super Duties also have them. but it's pretty much a Super Duty platform, so it's real similar. But they were made from 2000 to 2005, so they came in all of the Excursions as an option. They made 310 horsepower and 425 foot-pounds of torque, which is quite a bit. Now, the transmission that came in the V10, it was a 4-speed 4R100 transmission. Now, that's the same transmission the diesels use, but the diesels have some slight differences because the diesels made more torque, so certain components of the transmission had to be beefed up in order to accommodate the extra torque. Now, the V10 towing capacity in two-wheel drive with 373 gears, you got 10,000 pounds, or if you had 430 gears, you would get 11,000 pounds. Now, when you go V10 four-wheel drive, your towing capacity dropped a little bit because the four-wheel drive running gear adds weight to the vehicle. So if you had the V10 four-wheel drive with 373 gears, you got 9,600 pounds of towing capacity. But if you had the 430s, it was the same as the two-wheel drive, so you'd have 11,000 foot-pounds. So these Excursions were available in multiple packages. You had the XLT package, which usually had fabric interior, and to my knowledge, you could get gray leather, or I'm sorry, vinyl, but it was basically marketed as leather. You could get, it was the XLT, which was the base, and then you would have the Limited, which was higher, and then later years you got the Eddie Bauer package, which had some other nicer things to it too. So, but this is an overall good Excursion. I mean, it'll if you just, you know, haul something light, you drive around town and you don't mind, you know, not very good fuel mileage, it would be a good Excursion for you. Now, I originally had bought the tan 6-liter one for my wife as a daily driver, but the town we live in is relatively small, and her commute to work, which I thought was going to be further, is now going to be about 2 miles each way. And you could do it with a diesel, but diesels need to be warmed up and they need to be driven, and that 2 mile back and forth drive to work would not make that diesel very happy. So she's probably going to end up with the V10 one. You start it up, it's immediately ready to go. There's no issues with, you know, needing it to warm up. You don't have to worry about oil thickness as you do with the diesels, and they're just straightforward, really good engines. They're out of all the engines, the 5.4 and the V10 are going to be the least expensive to maintain. All these things pretty much need is oil, and you just keep up on the coolant, keep up on the batteries, and if you have an injector issue, they're super cheap, which you don't really have on the gas ones like you do on the diesels, but they're a pretty straightforward power plant. They're very, very good, and I'm glad that we have one now. I've really, really been a fan of the V10, and a lot of people don't like it because of the fuel economy, but you buy one of these to do work and haul stuff, not to get, you know, good fuel economy, because if you wanted something like that, you'd buy a Prius or some other EV or whatnot, but that's not what this is about. So kind of went over the V10, and good engine. It'd be a good choice if you're not towing too heavy. Now, if you don't mind paying the fuel cost and whatnot, the V10 will do a fine job of towing heavy as well, but normally the heavier towing is relegated to the diesels. But you know, there's a seat for every butt. So you know, if you prefer gas, or if, you know, you don't have a whole lot of diesel stations around your house or where you go, the V10 would be perfect for you. So yeah, like I said, it's a great engine. They were relatively trouble-free, except for the spark plugs popping out, exhaust manifold studs breaking, and a couple of other things, but they were great engines. So on to the 7.3. Well, what you got here is a 2002 Excursion with the legendary 7.3 Power Stroke diesel. Now, I know a lot of people laugh when I say legendary, but this is one of the few engines that still has a following to this day, and people swear by these things. They were incredibly reliable. You can put a crap ton of miles on them, and they really don't ask you for a whole lot. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to have two batteries. You got one there, one there. You have your turbo back there. It's a wastegated turbo, so it's not variable geometry. And yeah, they're a good setup. I mean, I've never really seen a 7.3 that I didn't like. They just do really well for their people. It's the same 7.3 that you would have in a Super Duty or in a Econoline van, and they are just known to go forever. And when you get with the 7.3 or the 6-liter, you go to a hydro boost for the brakes, and these things could have had a dual alternator setup. This one's a single. So, and here's your second battery, vacuum reservoir for the climate control and whatnot. And the diesel engines don't generate vacuum on their own, so you have to have a vacuum pump to create vacuum in order to run the accessories, and that's what this guy is. It's a little electric vacuum pump, and pretty straightforward motor. I mean, it's a standard style wastegated turbo, so when you're trying to build boost, it'll close the wastegate and allow the exhaust through the turbine housing to generate boost, and when it gets satisfied, it will open the wastegate and let the exhaust go straight down the pipe, bypassing the turbo and, you know, equalizing your boost. And pretty basic to work on. You got your map sensor here, your AC compressor here. This is a nice new coolant bottle that the previous owner stuck on here. But there's some things I got to address on it. I've had this guy for a few months, and I really haven't had a whole lot of time to get into it. But this engine, just like the 6-liter, is equipped with glow plugs. Now, what glow plugs do is when you're trying to start an engine on a cold day, gas engines will normally fire right up. Well, the diesels they're a compression engine, so they use compression and heat to help light off the fuel. Well, if you're trying to start something that's super cold, it's not going to be as inclined to want to start. So there's plugs that screw into the cylinder head that when you turn your key on, it'll activate the glow plugs, and the ends of them get red hot. And so what'll happen is when you crank over, it'll squirt fuel in, and those glow plugs will help light the motor off and get it, and they'll usually run for like 30 seconds to a minute, however long they need to. Then they'll eventually shut off once the motor's running, but they're needed to help you get started. Now, I know that Cummins and Duramaxes will use an intake heater. This one actually has one too, which is right here, so it'll help when it's really cold out. This guy will actually, the little heating element in here will glow and keep it, basically help heat the intake air so that it'll help the engine come up to temperature even quicker. Now, the 6-liters don't have the intake heater, but they do have the glow plugs. So this is a little more complex of an engine to work on versus the V10. You have 8 individual diesel fuel injectors that are fired off oil. They use oil pressure to force the chamber full of fuel through the nozzle, which causes the atomization. So it's called a HEUI system, HEUI. And it's a good system, but because it uses engine oil to, you know, act upon the fuel chamber to shove the fuel through the nozzle, these engines are sensitive to cold temperatures. So, you know, if you have bad glow plugs, or if you have weak batteries or whatnot, you can have cold starting issues. They're quite loud and clattery when you first get them going in the morning on a cold day, but once they warm up, they sound like any other diesel. But this 7.3 is a great engine. I mean, you had the old body style Fords that had the earlier version of the 7.3 that wasn't intercooled, and what the intercooler does is the boost comes out of the turbo here, then it heads down there, then there's what looks like a big radiator on the front of the vehicle, and it sucks as you're driving. Cold air goes across it, it cools that air, makes it colder and dense, and then it sends it back into the engine, so it's a more efficient charge of air so that the engine has more power and runs better. Now, the older old body style Fords didn't have that, but we're not really talking about that. We're talking about the Excursion. So this engine was available in the 2000 to early half of 03 Excursions, and then after that it got replaced by the 6-liter for emissions reasons and whatnot, which pissed a lot of people off because this is a really good engine. So like I said, I got my little cheat sheet here. So the 7.3 Excursion came with 250 horsepower and 525 foot-pounds of torque. The transmission in here is a 4-speed. It's the 4R100 transmission, which is it's basically the same transmission that's in the V10 Excursions and the 5.4 ones for that matter, but there are some components that are changed and beefed up to take the additional torque that the diesel engine will produce. Now, the 7.3 diesel and the 6-liter diesel were offered with 373 gears from the factory. In the Excursion, now on the trucks you could get different ratios for towing different stuff, but As equipped, these were maxed out at 11,000 pound tow rating. So you didn't have the 430 option like the V10s did. And just like the other Excursions, the 7.3 ones could be equipped with the XLT Limited or Eddie Bauer package. Now, I'm not sure if Eddie Bauer came 04 and up. I'm gonna have to do some checking in on that, but you'll know an Eddie Bauer because the seats will usually be black on the outside and have like a tan leather insert. So the Eddie Bauer is a pretty unique package. So is Limited, but the majority of them you're gonna find are XLT, which have the cloth interior. But love the 7.3. 7.3 is not without its issues though. You can have cam position sensors fail, which are down in the front of the engine. They're pretty easy to change, but if your cam position sensor goes bad, it can leave you on the side of the road. So a lot of 7.3 guys will leave a cam position sensor in their glove box or door panel. The 7.3s can suffer from glow plug issues and hard starts because glow plug failure and whatnot can make it difficult to start. The biggest downside to the 7.3 Excursions and pickups was the transmission. The 4R100 is a great transmission, but when you start adding power and you do different injectors and different turbo and start tuning these things, the 4R100 transmission likes to give up the ghost. So it's kind of an interesting situation. You would get it's a great engine with an okay transmission, but once you build up the transmission, it's going to be a super good contender. And yeah, I mean, there's a reason these 7.3s are still popular, and there's a reason that they're so desirable, and it's just because they're known to just pretty much run forever with without a myriad of issues. If the bottom ends are good on them until you start making above 450 horse, and then you can start breaking stuff. But obviously some people will have failures earlier. But the later 7.3s, this one included, had powdered metal connecting rods, so they weren't as strong as the prior forged rods, but they got the job done for something to drive around and pull a trailer. But like I said, if you want to pull a trailer, you're better off to go with the diesel. Yet you can do it with the V10 or the 5.4, but the diesel's usually the way to go. Now, the 7.3s tended to be, I know I'm going to catch heat for this too, but they tended to be stock for stock. They were slower than the 6.0. That's why when the 6.0 came out, so many people were stoked about it, because it felt significantly faster than the 7.3. And the 6.0 has a different style turbo, which helps reduce turbo lag and increases throttle response and whatnot, but these 6.0s weren't without their issues either. So this is the 2002 Excursion with the 7.3 in it, and it's a good truck. This is actually going to probably end up being my daily driver. Yeah, this is a really nice truck. I'm really excited. I've had 6 liters. I have a 6.7 that is that I use for hauling, and up to then my daily drivers were gas 5.4s. So I'm really excited to have a 7.3 daily driver. The 7.3 and the 6-liter diesel will get significantly better fuel mileage than the V10, towing or unloaded. It's not unheard of to hear people getting fuel economy in the 20s with a 7.3 or even a 6.0, and power is pretty easy to make on these things, as well as the 6-liter. I mean, the V10's a lot harder because it's naturally aspirated. You can do intake and exhaust and a couple other things, but on these you can just get a custom tune, put it on here, and then you can do your intake and exhaust and start making some significant power increases, and you can go crazy with a different turbo and injectors and all that. But once you start doing that, you have to address other weaknesses in the drivetrain, like the transmission. So 7.3, good rock solid platform. People love these things, they swear by them, and I'm slowly becoming a 7.3 convert. I love this truck. This one has 297,000 miles on it, if I recall, and you get a little bit of smoke when you first start it up, which clears up, and it doesn't have a whole lot of blow by at all. So this is the 7.3. Now we're gonna go take a look at the 6-liter. Here is the 2005 Excursion with the 6-liter. Now, as you can see, the engine compartment is significantly different on this one. Now, this one has a K&N intake, which, isn't the best, but it'll help. But you can see there's similarities and differences. Power steering reservoir is over here instead of being low now. This one is equipped with hydro boost. The coolant reservoir is up here now. Mass airflow sensor is here, and it's still got the 2 batteries. Alternators here, but this engine is significantly different. Now, this has what's called a variable geometry turbo. So instead of using a wastegate to open and close to control the boost pressure, this one has a set of vanes in there in the exhaust housing that will actually open and close to control the exhaust pressure to drive the turbo at different speeds. Now, it's a great system and it will work pretty well. The only thing you got to be cognizant of on the VGT turbos is they like to get cooked up if you idle it a lot or you're not hard on it. So every once in a while, you have a 6-liter, you got to take it out and just kind of rap on it a little bit and get her warm. Just get the exhaust housing warm and just get all the crap blown out of it. Another difference you'll see here is this guy. This is an EGR valve, which stands for exhaust gas recirculation. The 6-liter was really the first diesel that was in a Ford that had significant emissions. Now, I have been told and I have read that some of the 7.3s came with catalytic converters. Now, despite having worked at the dealer for a while as a heavy line diesel tech, I to this day have not seen one with a cat on it. And now I live in Colorado, so I'm probably not going to, which is all the best. The emission system on the 6-liter was a point of contention as it caused significant issues in the truck itself. Down underneath here, there's an EGR cooler that takes the hot exhaust gas, cools it before it's reintroduced into the engine right here to help drop emissions, much like an EGR system does on a gas engine. Now, the EGR coolers were known to rupture, and when they would rupture, you would end up getting coolant inside the engine, and water cannot be compressed, and so it would end up blowing the head gasket, and you'd end up with a toasted head gasket. These engines, even if you got rid of the EGR cooler and the cat underneath, these were also equipped with a big cat to reduce emissions, which was another issue with these. They would like to run really high exhaust gas temperatures, and if you tuned them hot and they weren't deleted, you would have issues with high EGTs and you could possibly melt a piston or something. Well, the other issue straight from the factory with these is that the 6-liters had head gasket issues. They used torque to yield head bolts, and in my opinion, there were not enough head bolts to properly hold the head down. So even in stock form, these things would blow head gaskets, and you'd get, because the diesel's compression is much higher than a gas engine, you'll actually get exhaust gas and compression going into the coolant bottle versus the other way around, where if the V10 blew a head gasket, you would be getting water in the engine. So these engines were good. They needed some love. When they first came out, when I was first at the dealer working on these things, there was really no recipe to get them right. You're only allowed to, you'd have to check the cylinder heads, and you'd have to put them back together with Ford head bolts, just basically torque to yield head bolts. And if someone tuned them or was hammering on them again, you would have the same thing happen. So, eventually people started coming up with solutions, that they call bulletproofing, which is kind of a generic term. It's like a BMX bike or rollerblades. It's just a generic term. What ended up being the solution on these was to use ARP or another brand head studs, which increase the clamping force to hold the cylinder heads down to the engine. And a lot of the time, even it's illegal to do it, but folks will delete the EGR cooler and the cat, which will help the engine run a lot better, as well as some custom tuning that can change the timing and give you significantly more power and increase your overall drivability and make these things just incredibly fun to drive. Now, in about the last 5 to 6 years, O-ringed heads have become a pretty big ticket item on these things, where they take the cylinder head and they cut a little tiny indentation around every combustion chamber, and they press a wire into it. And what will happen is when you clamp down, the O-ring wire will bite down into the head gasket and increase the clamping force, which will help you from blowing a head gasket again. And that's kind of the do-all. My 6-liter that I had prior to this one, I had it studded, but I was hard on it. I had different turbo and injectors, and I ended up blowing it again. So when I went O-ringed after that, I was fine. Now the 6-liters started coming in, the Excursions and the Super Duties, the latter half of 03. In the Super Duties, they went to 07, and then the Excursions, it went all the way to 05, which is the last year of the Excursion. Now, these are good engines. A lot of people have a love-hate relationship with them. Now, this wasn't a Ford-built diesel. This was actually built by International. Same with the 7.3. And in my opinion, if they're done right, if you're gonna buy a 6-liter and you're gonna drive it hard, tow with it, do anything like that, you're gonna have to stud it, and you're gonna have to, in my opinion, O-ring it. If you're gonna do anything bigger turbo, bigger injectors, whatnot, you're gonna need to stud it. And at the minimum, once these things are studded, and O-ringed, you can do whatever you want to them. They are incredibly fun to drive. You can do bigger injectors, bigger turbo, all that stuff, and they will take it and they will love it. Much like the 7.3, this is a oil-fired HEUI-based injector system. And just like the 7.3, if the oil's cold or you have oil contamination, it can cause a lot of issues with this. So just like the 7.3, stay up on your oil changes and run good oil. Do not let the oil go past its interval or become nasty. The other difference you'll notice here is the oil filter housing and fuel filter housing are here. The 7.3 has the fuel filter housing on top too, but this is the oil filter. It's a cartridge. It's not a spin-on can style. So it's actually kind of nice. And when you unscrew the housing and pull it out, there's a little valve underneath that will drain all the oil out, so you're not dripping it all over the top of the engine. Okay, I digress. Now, the 6-liter Ford came with 325 horsepower and 560 foot-pounds of torque. So it's about, I'm trying to do the math in my stupid head, about 40 foot-pounds more than the 7.3, and yeah, the 7.3 was 250 and this is 325, so it's about 70. I'm not good at math, never claimed to be, but it's kind of interesting that this is a significantly smaller motor, being 6-liter, but it makes more power than the 7.3. But with power in these in stock form came reliability. Now, like I said, they were both made by International, and Ford, after the 6.4, which came after the Excursions were done, the relationship with Ford and International basically quit being a thing. So the other nice thing about the 6-liter is it comes with the 5-speed transmission. It is a 5R110 transmission, and it's known to be a very, very good transmission. Now, I have not seen them fail unless, yeah, anybody can have a transmission failure, but they are known to be good. With stock injectors, stock turbo, you can put bigger injectors in, bigger turbo, and the transmission will usually take it and smile. So in my, humble opinion, I think that the way it can kind of be broken down is this was a 6-liter was a good engine that needed love, to make it, stock, 100% reliable, but you had a great transmission behind it. Now, the 7.3 was a great engine with an okay transmission behind it. Now, either combination will be good for towing your trailer. Now, the 6-liter, because of the VGT turbo, it has significantly better throttle response, and if you put these two side by side, the 6-liter should clean the 7.3's clock. But the 6-liter is a great choice as well. All three of these are great choices, just depending on what you want. If you're going to be towing the heaviest, I would definitely go with the 7.3 or the 6-liter. Now, in my opinion, I think the reason that these things still have such a huge following is people with larger families. Now, where I grew up in Southern California, you'd see a lot of these out at the desert and out at the river, because a pickup truck, if you have the flip down console, will seat 6. But if you have a bigger family, then you're kind of out of luck unless you want to take a second car. So these SUVs could tow 11,000 pounds, so you could tow a moderately sized toy hauler with your quads, your water, and everything in it, and still be able to seat a bunch of people. Now, you can do that with like a gas Suburban, because they made a 2500 Suburban for a while, but you're gonna get miserable gas mileage, and you're not gonna have anywhere near the power that a diesel will afford you. Now, I love these Excursions. Now, having been a Ford diesel tech, I'm quite partial to the Ford diesels, but these are just great vehicles, and it's a shame they don't make them anymore. They come with good engines, good transmissions. They're basically built off an F250 platform, so you have, a large, capable rear end, solid front axle construction, so you didn't have independent front suspension. So these were essentially a truck with a shell on the back that had a seat in it. And the spring rates are different. They're not going to be able to tow as much as a pickup would, because the trucks themselves, the Excursions, weigh more, and that's just their configuration. The springs were set up more for comfort versus towing heavy, but these things are just badass. I will probably own one until the day I die. And I'm making these videos to help encourage people to, if they've been on the fence or looking for a large SUV that, is now affordable, like make the dive, jump in. I mean, they're great trucks. I have no complaints about any of them. Now, like I said, the 5.4 is a little underpowered for my taste, but hey, 5.4 is a great reliable engine, and the 5.4 also shares the 4R100 transmission. So besides the spark plug issues and being underpowered, there's really nothing that the 5.4 can't do, except pull, a heavy trailer quickly. So that's where we're at on the engines. The V10, 6 liter, 7.3, all great choices. Just you want power, you want gasoline power, you want diesel power. That's kind of the differences between them. Now, I know you can get a lot more in depth about the differences engine-wise and whatnot, but they're all great choices. I would recommend any of them because, as I said, the Excursion is the king of SUVs for a reason, and yeah, I really, really wish Ford would make them again. So that's my kind of general synopsis on the engine differences. Thanks for watching, and I will definitely have more Excursion-related content coming up.